Hi, everyone. My name is Simone Hurd. I am the Director of Recruiting here at Jam City. So excited to be here today, so thank you for having us. I go by the pronouns she, her. I've been at Jam City for about 5.5 years, leading our recruiting team, and today I am joined by some amazing product managers at our organization, Jenny, Yash, Susie, and Jose. I would love it if everyone here could give a brief introduction about yourself, your pronouns, your role here at Jam City, and then how you grew into your role. Jenny, I'd love to start with you.
Thank you for having me. So as Simone mentioned, my name is Jenny Tai. I'm the Director of Product in our San Diego studio. Been with the company for about a year, almost a year and a half. And then my pronouns are she, her. And then in terms of how I grew into the role, I've been in the industry for about 7 years now. So just been kind of working at a few different companies and then had an opportunity to kind of join Jam City and grow a lot of the games here.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I'm just going left to right. I don't know how y'all see each other, but Jose, you're up next in my view.
All right, awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Jose Nakada, he, him pronouns, product manager in San Diego, best known for Cookie Jam Blast. Started as an analyst on the product team, so more on the data side, and actually grew into product after a few years of experience, now on my 3rd year here.
Awesome, thanks so much. Hi, Susie.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm currently an associate product manager, pronounced she, her. I've been in Jam City for almost 1 year. I'm still pretty much early in my career. I graduated from Wisconsin 2.5 years ago with a computer science and graphic design major. And back in college, I've been switching my major for like 5 times. And start out with like the pre-nursing, which I was pretty horrible. And then back to the business, psychology, education, and finally on CS. So it's quite a jump. So before I graduate, I went to this Grace Hopper conference, which is one of the world's largest gathering of the female computing. Went to the career fair. I got reached out from Zynga, which is one of the video game company based in SF. So they, regarding to this rotational PM program, open only to the new graduates. So I never thought I could really get in because that was a really competitive at that time, but I got the position, learned a bunch of like growth techniques. And then after that 1 year, I found this great opportunity at Jam City working on Cookie Jam, which is one of the match 3 titles. So I got the more ownership, more bigger scope. So honestly, I wasn't like a true gamer before. My mom never allowed me to play any game before, but now I just find this industry to be like super fascinating, super, the potential is really unlimited. Yeah, that's for me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I attended Grace Hopper this year virtually, and it's such a cool conference, and that's great that you were able to discover the gaming space there. Yash.
Okay. So I'm Yash. I am the product manager on Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. I go by the pronouns he, him. I've been at Jam City 3.5 years now. And I grew into my current role having worked in different teams. Simone was actually the one who hired me to Jam City. Have had a lot of great mentors, learned a lot from people here, and then I've been on Potter for the last 2 years.
Awesome. Thank you guys all so much. So would love to dive into some questions with everyone today, kind of about product and the industry. And if there are any questions, anyone feel free to ask away or any extra notes to share. But to kick things off, I'd love to hear from all of you your perspective on product managers in the gaming industry. Why are they important? And then if you want to share some tidbits about the specific games that you oversee or you work on and why it's super important to those games, I would love to hear that. Who would like to start? Yeah.
First.
Oh.
Sorry. So I think it's an interesting role. Basically, I think what you're trying to do is balancing creative expectations from people playing the game and the business needs of running that game. In general, mobile is a free platform, but that does make it really difficult to create a lasting experience where you can tell in the case of Hogwarts Mystery, for example, a full immersive story spanning the course of years. So that's where the role sort of sits. And for me, is development needs to be a little bit ROI focused in terms of return on investment focused in terms of um, you want to be creative, you want to create that immersive world, but you also want to make sure that you can sustain that storytelling for a long period so you can tell the full story. So it's a little bit of a balance of being creative and also looking at player feedback and performance to make sure that as a business, your game's running well too.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Jenny, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, and I think to help kind of frame this question a little better, if you think about the evolution of kind of where games came from like the console side to where Jam City's most of our portfolio is in the mobile space, right? Traditionally, I think the role of product managers didn't really exist, primarily because there wasn't a huge need for it. But as we kind of move into mobile, there's all these live ops, there's all these things that you can kind of do continuous development and delivery on for a lot of our users. And a lot of what Josh said is he said it was absolutely true. Was, you know, there needs to be product managers that kind of help keep an eye on the business and help make sure that we are connecting to our users and creating that experience on an ongoing basis. And as kind of our user base evolves and becomes more sophisticated, we are reacting to that as well as from a game side and also the creative side.
Awesome. Well, as a user, I definitely think that you guys are succeeding left and right. Jose, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think so. It's not too dissimilar, at least from like the experience that I've heard. I want to kind of like keep in mind for like the audience that product management in gaming was actually my first entry into the position. Like previously, I was completing my college degree in computer science. That's why I entered into data analytics in the first place. But I think what remains to be the same across industries is that you still have that communication that you need to build up between the business side, your players, as well as the engineering and design teams. Like you still are that cross section between those different groups. But what I've noticed, at least in gaming, is that you have to think a lot more on your feet and probably a little bit more design oriented, because the product that you're building is a lot more creative in nature, that you're trying to provide an experience that is trying to quantify fun. So that's what makes it a little bit more interesting, more challenging when working in gaming versus other types.
Definitely. Thanks. And Susie, what do you think?
Yeah, totally with what Jose and Jenny was mentioning. The gaming industry, I feel like it's really creative driven, and then making a game and make a game business, in my opinion, is kind of different, because as the PM, your main role is to bring the business value. You wanted to keep growing your player base. You wanted to scale up, especially as the free-to-play game. Converting them is not easy at all. Like Jenny said, the live services is definitely the key. Like the content is the key in this field. So you wanted to constantly keeping your players engaged by keep improving, delivering new contents to retain them longer. But you don't necessarily know what you wanted to ship unless you have the sharp eye or the gut feelings to consume the data surrounding you and make those quick decisions. So those data, I feel like it's something coming from everywhere, like from the consumer insight, from the actual user data, from UA marketing. So like a lot of like, even on social media, player voices. So you're able to like consuming all those information and being able to digest those and then have those your sharp eyes to make those best decision possible, because the market has been changing so rapidly. It's a really competitive field. So I think knowing the data, knowing the trend, and then getting those voices being heard, and then make your decision based on your product sense, product knowledge to make your game stay longer and bring players more fun, basically.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Those were great answers, everyone. Appreciate that. As somebody who previously worked outside the gaming industry and have been in the gaming industry for the last coming up on 6 years, I can personally attest that outside the gaming industry is a totally different world, and things in gaming can be so different and turns upside down. How would you all say that product in the games industry is different from traditional product management roles in tech, if you kind of have some insight there? I'll start with Jenny, because I know you most recently were not in games and we put you back in. Must be that competitive PM nature.
Yeah, so I've had the fortune of kind of working in a wide variety of different industries, both in the consumer side as well as more traditional B2B product management. And B2B is a completely different beast, but if we just exclude kind of the scope to more just consumer-based products, even it's some of the similarities revolve around, we're still thinking about the customer, thinking about the players. We've talked a lot about experience. And then analytics is also a huge component. I think that translates across a lot of most consumer products. One of the big differences I will say is kind of the scope and the amount of kind of what Simone was alluding to earlier is like the frequency of change that happens in games is probably much more accelerated than any other industry. And that's kind of one of the reasons I came back was because I just love it, right? Every day is a new challenge. It's a new exciting thing. You start the day thinking it's going to go one way, you end it completely different.
Yeah.
And that also just shows like how fast we have to react to our players and how often we are actually monitoring everything that is happening in the game to properly react to everyone.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And if you guys have any kind of background too on the academic side, feel free to throw that in as well. Yash, what is it? How is it different from your perspective?
From my perspective, the biggest difference is the fact that gaming is entertainment focused. Ultimately, the value of the product to users is they're playing this in free time or elsewhere just to find a break from other things. And that makes a major difference to the motivations of the players and what kind of expectations you can have from them and what kind of expectations they have from your product too. Like Jenny mentioned, games have moved a lot away from being built once and being done. So there's a lot more direct player feedback. There's huge communities of players passionate about games and things like that. And there's a lot of consistent releases, which means that there is that component of you need to know how to work with all that player feedback, how to work with those communities in your game development, and also be able to filter out some of that feedback to what the core of the problem is, because sometimes people will talk about things they like and they don't like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what's wrong with your product or what needs to change. So I think that's one major difference. And then the other difference in my experience has been the role is a lot broader. Um, you in a lot of tech roles, the product role can be super hyper focused to one part of the product versus in games, you get a lot more visibility into how what you're working on or the subset your team's working on impacts the whole user experience. And that makes the day-to-day a lot more interesting to me.
Definitely. Jose, what about from your perspective? You mentioned you started off in a different field entirely and kind of made your way over here. How does that kind of all tie together?
Right, that's a good point because talking about the academics behind it, like Josh touched on it just a little bit, but from the education that I had, we were more focused on console games or just like brick and mortar, ship one time, no live ops support afterwards. So coming into this experience was a lot different because now you have to think about more of like the iterative process of like maintaining a product for the long term. And then how that really applies to just working on the product itself is just that there's a lot of specialization that can happen that was like previously unaware to me that is needed to like operate on these products as a whole. So even within our own teams, I might be a singular product manager, but it's still an opportunity. And Susie's also had this like in her own experience where there might be a product manager that's just focused on the economy of the game exclusively, or there might be another one that's exclusively focused on live operations itself, like what gets pushed when, to make sure that there's like an event cadence that keeps people coming back or engaging or keeping the game fresh, that I previously was like not aware of, but is really cool once you start like diving deeper into that rabbit hole. And then the one other thing I'll add too, since we're talking about the differences about general product management, I don't know if this is the case, but Jenny could probably talk to it too, is that I feel like there's also a lot of genre specialization that happens just by the nature of like how different games can be across the spectrum, because how you operate a match 3 game could be wildly different against like a home style renovation or like a decor sort of like more lifestyle oriented game. So there's so many opportunities to kind of like find a niche that's good for you, and I would say if you're passionate about it, you should go like play those games, do the research.
Definitely. Jenny, is that something that you have seen kind of working on a number of different games over the years?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely build like a specialty. Like it definitely, there are translatable skills across different genres for sure, but every game is a different core loop. So the longer you work on one specific genre, you know, the more familiar you are with it. It just anything with the more years you have thrown at it.
Definitely. And Susie, what about from your perspective? You mentioned you worked on different games before as well. How has that been different, and just kind of how is it different from other industry experience you've had?
Yeah, so I was having internship before in the B2B products, so I can speak a little bit about how that skill set I built from that kind of environment translate to the gaming product. So the common thing across is just the business mindset. Regardless where you are as the PM, you have to be like pretty much data driven. You grab the insight from the analysis to drive the key decisions. And then as the entertainment product, like everyone has seen, it's a creative business. So you're not actually like solving a bunch of like problems, but you're adding value to the players. You bring more fun, joy to people day-to-day basis. And then the leverages are definitely much more stronger. It's the part of the DNA with the product. So it's a lot more different than the traditional PM roles. And it has to be done in a more sophisticated way in order to keep attracting them to coming back. One other thing is the teammates is a lot more different too, like the way that you're interacting with so many artistic creative minds. So they have a lot of like awesome idea. Sometimes you have to like keep balancing their creative vision with what is actually possible, what's economically possible. So sometimes you have to say no to certain decision because of the analysis that you've been done to helping the team morale to really being passionate about the product you're shipping. So I think from the teammate perspective, it's also slightly different than how you interact with the traditional PM roles.
Definitely, thank you. And that kind of actually is a great segue into the next question. And Jose, you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, so I'd love to kick it off with you. I think something that's so special about PM teams, especially at Jam City, is you guys working incredibly cross-functionally. You really have your hands in all different parts of the game, and you're super up to date on what's happening in all areas. For people who don't necessarily are as familiar with PMs in mobile gaming, how are you working with game designers and artists on a daily basis and affecting the game in that capacity?
Right. So for that one, it's really cool. So I guess the way I'll open up that discussion is the fact that the way our studio is set up, it's like very open air, very big walkways, like no closed cubicles. It's more necessarily like pods. So the way San Diego is set up in particular is that PM is like right next to the design group. Obviously, you throw that out the window once like COVID came in and now everybody's virtual, so we're literally like in each other's DMs. But the point that I want to make, even before we had to go into quarantine, it was like a very simple like walk up here. I have a question, I have an idea. Like we were actually building a sort of community within our studio so that our designers were more data driven, and they would actually teach our PMs to be more design oriented so that we could like try to overlap those disciplines. And what would like the result of that would be that whenever we were doing feature development, we would try to look from the come to kind of like the 10,000 foot view, the top bottom, to try to understand like there's a specific goal that we want to achieve from the business perspective of the game. How do we try to couple that game mechanic or feature that could try to deliver on those metrics, right? So that's really where a lot of that collaboration comes in, is that when product starts working with design or art, and then this is also including the user experience, user interface, we're all trying to come together and trying to build a sort of feature kit that can address all of those issues simultaneously by bringing everybody to like a seat into that table. And that also requires like a lot of like analytics, iteration, some consumer insights, even like usability testing to make sure that all of that flies. But that's really it's extremely collaborative. And if you're the type of person that can like feels good being more of like a generalist or can wear multiple hats, that's where like feature development as a product manager really comes in, to talk to all those groups.
Nice. I love that you gave the example of, designers being more analytical thinkers and PMs being more designer focused. not to totally put you on the spot, but could you maybe share an example of how that's been successful for you and your teammates in the past in some of our games?
Yeah, I'll give a really simple example. It's something that we like hammer on all the time. So like for anybody who's watching, or anybody who's like played games before, we call the tutorial. I've never heard this term before. Before I entered the industry, but we call it the FTUE. That's just like it's a FTUE, first time user experience. It's basically just a phonetic for the acronym, but that first like 10 levels is so important to build in a very streamlined manner, because it's literally the first impression that a player gets like once they download the app or they start the game. So because that's always in constant iteration, that necessarily, especially for like a newer game, that's the conversation we most frequently have. So it's very helpful. I mean, from the design perspective, they continue to iterate on it. They have their own kind of like player feel experience, their own little pinch points where they try to identify where players might be getting stuck. But then the analytics from the PM side come in to like explicitly let them know like a certain percentage of players got stuck here because they didn't know what they were supposed to do next.
Right.
And that comes super in handy. So like that one in particular always comes up.
That's a great example, and learning some new gaming lingo on this event too. Love it. Yash, what about from your perspective on a more narrative heavy design game? How are you working with designers and artists on a daily basis?
Well, that's a good note. Like I was gonna mention that the way I've had to interact with designers and artists has really changed game to game. For Hogwarts Mystery, it is a huge narrative game, very art heavy as well. So I think what's been common across the roles has been more of the more of how I interact with them is providing context to their work and making sure it has an impact. Like the example Jose was giving, where he was talking about the initial levels and giving them a percent of like, oh, this is where people drop out. In a narrative game, especially where a lot of things are subjective, things like this become a little more important because your motivations as a storyteller might not match the player's expectations of that story or that IP. And those are things we try to back up with data or what we're hearing from the community, surveys, things like that, to actually determine if something which we see as a problem from our experience or what we prefer is actually a problem for players, or if they actually love it. And we've seen a lot of examples of that working out different ways. So I think that's definitely one of the key differences. It ultimately is a lot about collaborating and communicating. I think the one big thing is the designers and artists are really good at what they do. So a key part of the interaction is knowing when to step back, having given enough context so they can do what they do best and really bring to life the story or the narrative within what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's a great point, and kind of bounces off what Susie was saying earlier and how she's able to provide feedback to designers and artists based on data. Susie, I'd love for you to share that a little bit more and kind of your interaction.
Yes, I think I wanted to echo a bit on Yash mentioned. So the PM's the main role is to answer like the what question. The designer was to address how. So sometimes it's really good to step back a little bit to give designer a lot more freedom, flexibilities to really leverage their creative mindset, creative insight to make the feature really fun. And then I think the dynamics across different teams is also kind of different across the different teams that I worked with before. But regardless, the priority from each team is the teamwork, the collaboration is always the key to really drive the progress to be really optimal. So I think since the PM has become more specialized at certain area, like the live ops, economy, data analysis, like Jose was mentioned, the early goal, defining the goal, defining the scope is really important to allow the designers to know like what's really missing currently in the game, that what we can bring those value to the players, and then let them to leverage their design muscles to make it really cool, to bring people more joy. Especially as a cookie jam game, it's pretty much interacting with like older demographics. Sometimes we have to like constantly bring those user research ideas to our designers, let them know what the players' voices are, so that they are able to internalize those different data points, and then making sure that we're still on the right track to constantly refining the scope We also have this pod structure, which each PM pair with the game designer, which also with the artist. It's like a really, it's like a group project, that kind of feeling. So it's really optimal, constantly just communicate to each other and keep coming up with new ideas to refining the scope of the features to make it the best way possible.
Awesome. Well, for everyone listening and still in school, group projects are indeed very important, and get used to them. But love that you said that kind of that info about teamwork, and I think that PMs on each of these teams really kind of set the tone for the collaboration of the game design and the artists and the teamwork. Jenny, from someone who oversees multiple games on this capacity, how are you working with the different designers and artists on the teams and ultimately kind of keeping that collaboration going?
Yeah, and I think the general theme that everyone has spoken to is really just about collaboration and teamwork. So really what we want is we want things from the ground up, right? We don't want it to be like, hey, all the directors, all the GMs or whoever really dictating what goes into a game. We want it coming from each of the pods down in San Diego or where however each studio is structured, but really coming from the individual designers and coming up from like a grassroots like collaboration crowdsource idea. And that can come from any idea to any type of like feature improvement that they see in the game. And the way we structured is like, hey, as long as you know our business goals and it ties some type of business action, we'll consider it, right? And then we throw it into the backlog and we always just properly prioritize it based on the needs at that time. But everything is really driven by the team, and that's kind of how we continually foster and kind of develop everyone as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we talked a little bit earlier about kind of how some product roles outside of gaming and specifically outside of mobile would be different to our mobile gaming PMs here. What is some advice that you would give to someone interested in making the leap from traditional product roles to game development, maybe? Jenny, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think from a recruiting perspective, you know, the key things I look for is really like, how can you break down problems, right? As I think we mentioned earlier in the conversation, our players know what they don't like and they know what they like, but they're not going to really tell you what is it, why. Mm-hmm. So we have to kind of dig a few times through our surveys, through our quantitative data or whatever information we have to really dig into those insights and try to almost guess through kind of A/B tests or different features and kind of poke around to see, okay, are we hitting it? It's a lot of trial and error. So having kind of that structured thought process to help eliminate each hypothesis that you get along the way really helps.
So interesting. And it sounds like sometimes the players might not even themselves know why they like something so much or don't like it, but you guys are the geniuses behind the curtain.
We try, yeah, we try our best.
Jose, what are your thoughts there? You heard you chuckle and kind of in some of that.
Yeah, that was specifically to Jenny's point, is that players, I mean, anybody who does any sort of self-reporting doesn't necessarily know how to best verbalize like what they're experiencing. You see it a lot in player reviews too, like this game's bad, this game sucks, but like there's no depth that you can get from that. Otherwise, that's more of an aside. To answer the question in particular though, for somebody making the leap, it really helps a lot to already, I mean, maybe this is like very, very straightforward, but to be a fan of the game or the industry that you're trying to join, because of course this is going to be something that continually comes up whenever you're trying to do research on your competitors, is that to be a fan of the games and just have like that breadth of library and interest of exploring other people's products as well is going to help so much for being able to put yourself in the shoes of the same players that you're trying to build an experience for. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents. Like perhaps you're already a fan of the game, but you should definitely like, you know, study your area where you want to go.
Awesome, thank you. And Susie, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the passion is definitely the key. Like Jose mentioned, knowing what your goal is. It's kind of like you are your own product. So why you wanted to make the shift, what kind of the skills that you wanted to learn from making this transition is also important. Knowing your like North Star metrics as the PM terms. So I think most of the skills are pretty much transferable. Like your day-to-day job is still like writing specs, conducting a lot of data analysis, getting involved to like a lot of like different functional team collaboration. So I think one advice I would give is to try to be more involved in those gaming community, do some like feature tear down when you get the chance to, knowing why this feature is built and what kind of value that this feature will be able to bring on the business perspective. Reaching out to like more product people in the gaming field. I've been also listening to a bunch of like podcasts related to gaming, like the Deconstructor of Fun, some of the newsletters. So just keep track of the what's really going on in the industry and knowing like what your end goal is. Because I know in the big gaming company versus the indie studio, the way that PM role really work is also very different. So I think knowing all those contacts will be very important to make a leap.
Definitely, and I can share from the recruiting perspective, those who are maybe outside of the gaming space and looking to come in, it's exactly like Susie said, maybe if your background isn't in gaming specifically and you're in school right now and you're studying something a little bit different, engaging in the classes where you have electives that are gaming focused, or if you're able to join a club and become involved in that and just get your hands a little bit dirty in the industry is really helpful. It shows that you have a passion for it, and it shows that you also have kind of made a commitment for that passion. Yash, what do you have to say about that?
I think that covers a lot of it actually. Like anyone coming in from a product manager role in a different industry probably already has the soft skills to do the roles. I would really recommend playing a lot of different games and actually think about them critically rather than just playing them for entertainment per se. Like think about how they're introducing you to the mechanics when they introduce events, or if other games in the same genre do it differently, because usually there's a lot of testing and research which has gone into all of this, and it might help you understand why a game's catering to their community a certain way. And then the other thing I think, which might not be solely unique to games, but I think given that this is a more entertainment driven industry, is I think the best PMs in the industry are the ones who aren't solely focused on the business criteria. They do a good job balancing the creative side or the team's creative side with the business part of it. Like you need to be able to make decisions to help the community out, which sort of goes into like things about representation and inclusion within games too. Hogwarts Mystery, like one example comes to mind from recent years, is we've it's one of our pillars of development to like keep the game inclusive, show a variety of show diversity in our cast, and like let people make their own personal choices come to when it comes to dating or the story itself. And that means that oftentimes when we're releasing something, it's not at all business focused. It's solely because it makes the story more representative for the people or makes it a world they can actually see themselves in. And that's knowing when to do that, knowing when you can do that, and finding time to do that, I think is important too.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think that that's so amazing that the Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery Game has that as one of their main pillars. Because I know it's equally as important to Jam City as a whole. We actually have a question, and it is: what does it mean to each of you to have a commitment to diversity in the context, excuse me, of product management or recruiting? I certainly can answer this from a recruiting perspective, and that diversity, is a huge driver in how we're trying to build our teams. And it's definitely top of mind in every interview that we have. We aim to make diverse games. They are games that appeal to everybody. So in order to make games that appeal to everybody, we have to have every perspective and representation on the back end to make sure that we are creating these games for everybody. Again, from a recruiting perspective and more of a Jam City culture, we really strive to have a culture that everyone believes that they can come to work and be their true authentic self, and it's a safe space for them to be that way. And we have, a head of diversity, Fran, who's fantastic about really implementing this across the company and making some great initiatives for us here at Jam City. But as the question goes, it really goes beyond just our company culture and kind of who we are. It also dives into the games. Yash, you just gave an amazing example of the different representation seen in Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. Does anybody else have something to add for the games and kind of how we're creating these and diversity and as it relates to product management?
I think I'll also jump in there. This is something that I actually got from you earlier too, Simone, something that I dropped into the chat as well. But We used to think about recruiting as having somebody who necessarily fit like a culture fit, and to change your perspective and really think about them as a culture add. And in that case, like it's really effective, because what you learn, or what you become to like grow to understand with like inclusion, is that that's how you build a broader range of like a lot of interesting perspectives. Because if you're trying to make, decisions on a particular group without a representative being there as a part of that group, then it's not necessarily informed. So that would be my my perspective on it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll also echo a lot of what Jose said. So I think prior to me joining the San Diego studio, I think I was the first female hire on the San Diego product team, especially. And we were making a game specifically for females.
Yeah.
So that was like a voice that we didn't really have. And, when I approach recruiting, I think about more of like, what is the diversity of thought? Like, what is your unique perspective that you add? Because we create these mass market games, right? We are touching almost every type of person out there. We want them to play those games. So having that type of voice and representation on the team is incredibly important. We definitely are conscious of anything that we represent in our game has to be kind of inclusive, as well as accepted by the players and the public, and pushing that forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone
I'll
want
also add some.
Yeah.
Is I think besides just the recruiting perspective and the product perspective, it also comes down to the fact that you're the leaders on your team more often than not. And it's on you to make sure you're creating that kind of a safe space where people on your team, especially if it's a diverse team, feel safe to bring up ideas to incorporate into the product or the day-to-day to make their lives easier or to help represent other people. Which goes back to that softer skills part of product management is the communication and like actually knowing how to work with individuals and create a safe space for them.
Amazing. I'll definitely say it's something that's ongoing for us here at Jam City, and our hiring efforts. It's something that we're always striving to improve upon, do better, and just continue to grow as a company. And hopefully that's going to continue to be represented in the games that we create. Final question here. What advice would you give an aspiring product manager who is interested in the gaming space? Susie, I'd love to hear from you. You mentioned when introducing yourself that you had a whole bunch of interest in school and were kind of studying a number of different things. How did you kind of come into the gaming industry, and what advice would you give to somebody else who's interested in breaking into the gaming space?
Yeah, I think majoring in computer science definitely helped a lot to getting those technical skills, constantly sharpen my technical skills when you're approaching problems, how to solve the problem, break down the problems. And then some skill definitely start in the classroom, like the data analysis, how to being able to master certain software application or like coding language. But majority of those skills are still from the day-to-day interaction with your real job, those experience. So I feel like it's important to having a constant mindset of the growth mindset, right? Listening to some more voices from the industry folks, and then building out your networks. Constantly think about like why certain things are created in this way, that what kind of like gaming strategy within this feature, within this product that's really helping this product to be growing, to be optimized, to be like really keep up with the trend. And then defining your goal. Like I mentioned, like the PM, the main thing is defining your North Star metrics, because you are your own PM. So for you, if you're pretty much interested in the game industry, even if you're not super like the gamer like me, because I'm one of the solid data points, so I don't play any game, but I still got to be able to landing in the gaming field, having a bunch of really awesome experiences with different team, different games. So I think get more involved in the local gaming community is very important. I think one of the things that I've been also doing is to constantly reaching out to people that's already in the field and let them know like I'm really passionate about this, and just give us more insight on what are some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis to keep sharpening your skills.
Amazing. Jose, what about from your perspective? What advice would you give to an aspiring PM who's interested in the gaming space?
It's actually a really simple one, and it's just putting it into practice. So we have this concept in product of doing a teardown, and that's actually what I would really encourage a lot of people to do who are interested in product, is just try your hand at one of those. And basically, what a teardown is that it's an exercise of studying the game from the ground up, and really understanding like how each and every element works together to build up the entire product. You can get more specialized and maybe just do a teardown on a specific feature within a game that you like. But other teardowns might explore, up until you get to level 100, or like only the first 10 levels. But it's really trying to put together all the pieces of like what makes a popular experience work, and then being able to verbalize that, and also identify areas of weakness that you might perceive that other genres are doing better, or other games within that space are doing better, and trying to bring that in as part of like your recommendations for feedback. Like, there's more potential here, or we're not addressing all of this segment potentially, like, with this particular feature, because it's for only a group of players that have like a certain amount of like currency, or or at a specific level in the game. So doing a teardown, I think, is the best way to put yourself into the mindset of, not only am I looking at the business KPIs of, what is my revenue, how is my DAU doing, like retention, etc., but then it gives you an opportunity to drill deeper about like the important elements that a player cares about, how many rounds am I getting to play per day? How long are my sessions? Am I running out of money too fast? And trying to blend those together so that like you're actually thinking within that mindset.
Yeah, that's great. And I will say, from the recruiting perspective, more often than not, in any kind of interview that we're doing on the product side, we will have applicants do some sort of a teardown for us. So maybe if you don't have that gaming background, that is a great place for you to shine and really show your understanding of the gaming space, and show, your understanding of how, or your perspective on how players are thinking and approaching our game, and an opportunity to point out some really, really cool things for us. Yash, what about from your perspective? What is some advice you would give to an aspiring PM for the gaming space?
I think Susie and Jose did cover a lot of the pre-prep stuff, so I'll answer this more from an interview focus. I think the three things to kind of try and do during an interview is show an interest in the product. Like before the interview, do play the game you're trying to interview for, have a sense of what they're doing, and show the interest in the product, because that will be the product you'll be working on. So it should be something you like or care about. The other part is, at least in my experience, if you're asked for your thoughts on the product, which you usually will be as part of a teardown or separately, it is better to be honest and actually speak about the strengths you see in the product and the places you think it could use improvements. But talk about the why of why you see those things, because what we're looking for is how you're breaking down problems in a way that can be proven or disproven. It doesn't matter if that's exactly right, because you don't have context for what the game is doing or why certain things are the way they are. And we understand that. Like my interview at Gem City, I actually talked very critically about one specific game, and then I later found out that the person I was talking to was the PM of that game, and I was horrified because I was afraid that I'd blown it by telling that PM that their game wasn't great. However, like after I got hired, that person's a really close friend now, and I talked to them, and they appreciated that. Like what they were looking for was someone to come in and actually talk about what they thought about a product, and just talk about it in a manner where it's not a, hey, I don't like this, but in a manner where I think this doesn't work because XYZ. And maybe if that XYZ isn't true, then this is good kind of thing. So I think that's useful, and feel free to come in with that opinion. And the last part, I apologize, I'm going on a little long, but is bring your strengths to the table. Like we talked about, genres are different. The role differs from game to game, from company to company. So try and understand what your strengths are and how they apply to the industry. You could have a tech background and have a really good understanding of development. You could have a data background, have a really good understanding of data side things. You could have a really strong art background and have a good understanding of how that pipeline goes. And that could be valuable to different games. So when you come into the interview, like show off your strengths. And if it doesn't apply to that game, there's a good chance that there might be another game in the company which is looking for someone with those strengths, and you might get a chance there, or you might get a chance down the road. So don't be afraid to showcase your strengths for a cookie cutter PM image, or sacrifice your strengths for a cookie cutter PM image.
That's awesome, Yash, and that was some really great interview tips that you shared. And I would also say, you know, coming to the table with your own opinion just really kind of ties into the idea of diversity of thought. It takes all different opinions and strengths and from all types of people. So thank you for highlighting that. That was great. Jenny, we will finish off with you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what can I add on. I think maybe we can talk about the mindset that you can kind of go into kind of prepping is really just about understanding motivations, right? If you ever get an interview with me, this is definitely going to be an interview question, is I will dig into see, can you understand what is the player motivation, and not just from an extrinsic, but from the intrinsic of like, how are we moving the player and why are they playing this game? Like specifically from a whole catalog and portfolio of games that are out there in today's world. And so that's definitely like the mindset you need to think about when you're either doing a teardown or when we're asking you about an opinion about a game, you know, really understanding that specific aspect. And I'll also leave with you guys some books that can help you kind of like shape that frame of thought. So I really have enjoyed Hooked by Nir Eyal and Habit by Charles Duhigg. They're all about habit formation, and it's a practice that we actually employ in the games world, specifically, you know, when we're trying to create these habit formations through all the different loops and rewards and other type of feature designs. So two good books for you guys to read.
Awesome. I'm gonna write those down. Thank you.
Same.
Rob, were there any other questions for us from the chat? Well, I think that no more. I think that concludes our session today. Thank you, Jenny, Jose, Susie, Yash. You guys had such great insight. It was so amazing to chat with you. Thank you for everyone that participated and listened in. This was such a great bonus to my afternoon here today. And see you all next time. Jam City people, I'm going to take a quick little screenshot of us. So if you want to smile, it's happening.